First up, as I'd mentioned, the entire theme around our next session is all about building resilience, financial systems built to cope with global shocks. So let me go ahead and invite our very first speaker. We have with us Mr. Daniel Castillo, Head of Foreign Direct Investment Attraction at Pro Guatemala, leading national investment promotion and FDI strategy initiatives. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Moving ahead, let me please invite Mr. Hemang Jani, who serves as a senior advisor to the Executive Director representing Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Sri Lanka at the World Bank. Thank you very much for joining us. Our next speaker, we have with us none other than Mr. Neelkant Mishra, Chief Economist at Axis Bank and Head of Global Research and Board Member at Axis Capital. Thank you very much for joining us. And to bring this conversation alive and together for us all, we have with us none other than Mr. Govindraj Etiraj, a very senior Indian journalist and media entrepreneur, founder of India Spend, fact checker, and Boom, leading platforms in data-driven public interest journalism. Please put your hands together and welcome our next set of speakers. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to request you, sir, if you could please join on the side as a moderator. Thank you so much again, and over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And, we're going to talk about building financial resilience. And I'm reminded of 2008 when we were at a fellowship. And there was a friend of mine who was with Goldman Sachs, and we were at an offsite in Udaipur, as it happens, but he was from Goldman Sachs, New York. And we were supposed to meet that morning and have a session, and he didn't turn up because he was turned out awake all night. And he said, no, there's something happening in New York, and we are trying to figure out what this is, and I had to stay awake all night. The next night, the same thing happened. He was awake again all night, and trying to figure out, this is middle of 2008. And then on the third day, I said, well, what is it that's going on? Because then I could see some of the news items. He said, it's to do with CDOs. So I said, what is CDOs? He says, collateralized debt obligations. I forgot about that term immediately because it was not something you remembered. And then, of course, as you know, when we look back, this was really the 2008 financial crisis. My friend did stay on in Goldman Sachs for many, many more years. He did survive that round, but it was a brutal period. I think that really brings us to where we are today. We seem to be in a position today where we are not really looking at or facing any financial crisis. But that does not mean there is not a financial crisis that's lurking underneath or bubbling up. So the idea from this panel today is to understand what could be some of those risks that we should be ready for or preparing for or gearing up, both as countries, as regions, as multilateral cooperatives, and what do we do practically to buffer ourselves from a potential contagion or a financial risk event that might happen. So what that could be and how it could flow out is really something that I'm going to hand over to our panelists to speak. And we're going to look at it from 2 points of view. One is, of course, economic and macroeconomic, but equally from a political standpoint. And that's where I think two of our panelists are going to weigh in with their opinions. Each of our panelists is going to speak for about 4 or 5 minutes, and after which we'll have a conversation. And I'm going to request Neelkant to kick it off, including with an India lens on what things look like or how we should be looking at the risk universe ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Govind, and thankful to the organizers for inviting me here. So the crisis always hits you from unexpected angles. So most of the problem areas of the past, like emerging markets used to have uncontrolled fiscal deficits, very high and unmanaged inflation. They would have very unstable financial systems. Most of those problems, I think, have been addressed to some extent. So today, the fiscal discipline is much better in the emerging markets. The financial systems have adequate buffers. So the problems of the last 15, 20 years, or the things that caused the crisis, have been kind of addressed. But I think there are new risks emerging. So for example, the Washington consensus stands broken. So the primary pillars of what was the advice given to emerging markets is now questionable. So if the developed markets themselves are ignoring debt to GDP, are seeing sharp increases in bond yields, then trying to convince other countries that there is merit in doing so is being fiscally disciplined is questionable. There is also an unhinged foreign currency market. So it is very clear that the US dollar needs to fall by 25-30% in trade-weighted terms, real effective exchange rate. While they could manage to do that in 71 and 85 by forcing the Deutschmark and the yen to appreciate against the dollar, this time they have to get the Chinese to behave. And I think that creates a period of possibly competitive devaluation, which again can throw up very new challenges. So for example, if you see India's gold imports surging and the fact that gold can become an area of speculative interest, can actually start destabilizing many of the weaker currencies. India doesn't have a problem really in that front yet, but this can create new challenges. I think the rise of AI puts new stress points, new pressure points on the split of income between wages and profits. So as you know, GDP is calculated by adding wages and profits. The split between them is very important from a political perspective. And what AI can potentially do is that it destabilizes the balance in many of the economies. We also have a very new challenge this time. While we've seen new industrial economies becoming supremely dominant, like when the Industrial Revolution happened in the UK, when we had the rise of Germany after 1870, but the kind of dominance that China is showing on the manufacturing side is, I would say, unprecedented. Having in a much more integrated world, having one country control 38 to 40% of world manufacturing. And the challenge I see is that it is only going to get worse. So the imbalance in the Chinese economy, that their percentage of GDP in consumption is unlikely to rise. I don't think they're serious about rebalancing. And the investment, despite all the chatter around controlling involution, the investments in industrial capacity are continuing. So it is reasonable to think that Chinese share of global production in the next 5 years will be higher than where it is now. Now that poses a very new set of challenges to the emerging and the less developed economies. Because as the developed markets start drawing up their barriers, all of that surplus is going to land in Southeast Asia, in Africa. And then how do you respond to these kind of challenges? So as policymakers, and this can have impact on their currencies, on their balance payments, and lots of other stress points that emerge. So as much as we have solved last time's problems, or we have at least created bulwarks against them, I think there are a completely new set of challenges emerging. For the developed world, though that's not the part of the mandate, I think the rise of private credit, the fact that the banks became heavily regulated, they stepped out of many markets, like the basis trade in bond markets, for example, or the rise of private credit, which is creating new types of challenges. What happens to all the funds that have invested in commercial real estate if software jobs and a lot of the office jobs are going to start coming down. So there are new types of challenges that will emerge. So we can't really take our eye off the ball. There are many things to be addressed at a country level and at a multilateral level.
Got it. And there's some interesting questions that I'd love to sort of follow through on you, but it does seem like we were maybe mentally ready for one contagion, but what you're saying is now there could be a multitude of challenges that will hit us at one time. Hemang, you want to go next?
Thank you. I think, first of all, let me thank PMG, Vijay and the entire team for creating such a important platform. I think your theme, Anantyam, is very inspiring. And yesterday we inaugurated the AI Summit. And let me add one more thing to it, that with this theme on the topic of resilience, I think what our Honorable Prime Minister is adding is infinite opportunities, infinite solutions, but infinite inspiration. And that is the theme I think this platform can carry for the global world, that how much infinite inspiration can India create today? And that is what actually resilience means. So let me, of course, after Nilkant has spoken, there is not much left on the table to speak on challenges. But let me put the development institution or multilateral MDB lens on the topic. We see 6 kind of categories of risks. First is, I would say, the monetary and financial risk which you covered. Second is the pandemic which you discussed about, COVID, what happened, and Priyam ji has written a very wonderful book on it, from where the inspiration coming on. Social and political risk, which we can say largely for a country like India, we are shielded through it. Technological disruption, one elephant in the room, which you also touched on. Geopolitical shocks, which we are going through right now. And climate and related risk, right? So 2 of these are very long term. Climate risk, we know it's a long term impact, it's going to go there. And technological disruptions, it's going to keep happening, it's going to keep happening. So one aspect is when we work on monetary and the shocks that come with it in the short term, how do we also work in the long term addressing some of these challenges? And that is where I think India is a very good example. Every time there has been, you are part of a global system, it's a two-way street, right? You can't be shielded completely. But every time there has been a shock on any 6 of these, we have been able to shield ourselves. Why? Because we have been, whether it is our central bank or whether it is government and its initiatives, we have been working on core resilience of the country and its own systems. So I think if you, in the opening remarks, if you want me to pick 2 challenges which I would like to work on is this, the climate and technology. How do we put our lens through those challenges and work in that? Thank you.
Okay, so I'll come back to that in a moment. Daniel.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this valuable space. It's really a pleasure to be surrounded by such distinguished people in such a beautiful place like Mumbai. First time for me in India. What a beautiful country. What a great event this is. So it's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Priyam. And to answer about resilience and bringing my country into the equation as an emerging economy, you know, when I was invited as a speaker and I saw the subject, the theme of this panel, external shocks, resilience, economic disruptions, I was very excited. And I thought, you know, from the perspective of the government and state, this is exactly what a government is designed to. No? The state is built on the foundational idea of working and thinking strategically under stress. That's the legitimate expectation of citizens and stakeholders. No? The state is going to calmly think through stress. It's going to calmly come with solutions in the more tense of the episodes. No? So through moments of change, the state should have or should show continuity, should show consistency in its public policy. Resilience then is not improvised in times of crisis, but it's rather built over years and years of stability. And for the so-called emerging economies, I personally think resilience and growth are not opposed terms. I think they are mutually reinforcing. When systems hold, when confidence holds, economies grow and recover faster. This direct interplay is unavoidable. And from the perspective of Guatemala alone, the country I represent today, I would say we understand that resilience starts with restraint, prudence, discipline, responsibility. emerging economies often face the temptation to use the financial system freely and aggressively during good times, no? Our experience, on the other hand, shows that conservative macroeconomic and monetary framework create space for growth precisely because they reduce instability. And much more important, they reduce the perception of instability, which are two different things. As you know, today I represent the Investment Promotion Agency. I think I am the only investment promotion agency being represented in this event. So I feel obliged to say that the way states manage to navigate external shocks is fundamental for FDI attraction. For example, externally perceived resilience creates trust, credibility, which directly translates into economic growth. For this reason, macroeconomic stability still remains a very big incentive for foreign investors making important decisions of where to settle their productive operations. In Guatemala, we do have a disciplined monetary policy, a conservative banking system, and clear institutional boundaries that have helped keep inflation low and exchange rates stable over nearly 2 decades now. This stability allows businesses to plan long-term, to anticipate risk, to anticipate cost, and to protect the consumer acquisition power. So I would say predictability, resilience is a growth enabler in today's context. When firms trust inflation policies, currency variations, and liquidity conditions, they invest more, they create more, they insert themselves into the value chains and commit for the long run. That is how emerging economies strengthen their positions.
Thank you, Daniel. I think the term trust is very important, and I'm sure we'll come back to it later. Yeah.
Hello, thank you for having me here. Well, our world has gone through different financial crises in the last 2 decades, but the point is that financial crises often are not born as financial crises. Think at COVID-19. It was a health emergency that turned to some extent into a financial crisis. Think to the Greek debt crisis. It was not financial in origin. It was the consequence of a bad policy, of a bad political choice of letting Greece adopting euro without having the financial and economic fundamentals for doing so. Think about the energy crisis that many European countries have faced in the last 3 years because of the Russian-Ukrainian war. It was a geopolitical event that started an energy and thus financial crisis. So to make our system, our financial system more resilient towards these shocks, first of all, we need stronger countries. Countries that can, at political level, address this issue, address at the root the crisis before it becomes financial. And what do I mean with stronger countries? Well, first of all, I must say that in this area, size matters, because in a world of 8 billion people, small and medium-sized countries simply don't have the instruments to cope with crises that intrinsically have a global dimension. So if countries like India, like the US, or like China can still effectively act on a global scale, smaller nations need to act together if they want to have an impact. And that's why I think the European Union, despite all its flaws and imperfections, is still the best chance for a prosperous future for Europe. And this could inspire, I think, other small and medium nations in other areas of the world. We need to be united, we need to act together like the European nations did during the COVID crisis if we want to have our voice heard and we want to have an impact. But stronger nations means also sovereignty. And I mean sovereignty in all its forms. Being able to control your borders, possessing a strong military deterrence, keeping the state debt reasonably low, because when your state debt grows too much, you are exposed to a lot of financial threats. But also avoiding to rely on foreign companies in some key areas as cybersecurity and military equipment. And if we look at the US, they are, I think, one of the best examples of a sovereign country, of a resilient country. They are not perfect, of course, nobody's perfect. But Europe has made some mistake, I think. The European Union has made some mistake in these areas, and we are paying a price for it. We are seeing it, for example, in the context of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, where the European Union is taking a strong positions, maybe even too strong, but we are not effectively able to play a role in solving the conflict. It will be, it is quite clear that it will be between the US and Russia that an agreement will be hopefully found. Another lesson I think we can take from the recent past of Europe is that in international relations, pragmatism and common sense matters more than principle and values. What do I mean? That if you base your foreign policies, your international relations on principle and values, it's dangerous because different nations have different values, different civilizations have different principles. And historically, Europe tended to project and to impose its own values to other countries, and it never turned out well. That's pretty clear. And unfortunately, it seems to me that the European diplomacy guided by Kaja Kallas still tends to project the European values that are totally legitimate, that are totally fine in Europe, but they tend to project and to impose them on other countries. And this is affecting negatively the credibility of the European Union from my point of view in the eyes of our global partners. So I hope everybody, including the Europeans, will switch back to a more pragmatic approach. I come from Italy, from the country of Niccolò Machiavelli, the founder of political science. And as Machiavelli said, it is not important that we agree on everything. It is important that we don't kill each other. And that's a good starting point. And I would like to spend a few words about the EU-India trade deal that has been finalized recently. I think the global market is becoming more and more fragmented because of tariffs, because of geopolitical events, because of tensions. And we know that there are many other tensions, like between China and Taiwan, that in the future could fragment even more the global market. So even if the EU and India have two very different markets, rules are different, so I expect that in the first, when the deal will enter into force, into effect, in the first times there will be problems, there will be some criticism and some issues, but in the long term, I think that creating a common market with almost 2 billion consumers can really help our economy to get more stable in the long term, especially in front of new possible threat, a new possible tariffs war that could arise if the geopolitical relationship between the US and China should get worse. We, of course, everybody hopes that it will not happen, but we must be pragmatic, we must be realistic, I think, and we must take into consideration the possibility of a real tariffs war between China and the US.
Okay, thank you very much. So just one point for the two economists on my panel, which I want to pick up from what they said. I think there was a concept of trust as a filter to look at economic stability and stability itself and in the economic context, and in the political context. So let me start with you, Nilkant, and I'll also come to Hemang. So do we tend to, or could we tend to assume political stability as creating the right preconditions for resilience? So political stability, let's say, is a given, but does that mean that it's also leading to the resilient conditions that are useful for, let's say, investments and greater financial vibrancy and so on?
I think that's a great point. And I think it is a very important part of resilience. And remember that the cost of capital reflects, it comes down when there is greater predictability. So if you have much greater certainty on the future, your cost of capital starts to fall, and then you can start investing, which basically means that you can invest for the long term. If there is a high degree of unpredictability, I think it becomes much more challenging for people to invest, and that brings down growth for everyone. In terms of resilience, I think the same would apply, because if you want to build the assets, invest in, say, suppose you're investing in climate change, and you're worried about climate change, and you want to contribute to the global commons, but you see no one else doing that, and then you kind of start pulling back from that. If there is a period of investment where you invest for 5 years and the returns come after that, if you have no clarity on what will be there 5 years later, then there is no need to invest. And I think it hurts everyone. But I must say that some of the unpredictability that we are seeing is a failure of what seemed like a very stable system earlier. So the rise of President Trump, the rise of all the hardliners on the left in some of these smaller towns, and so these are all reflecting the internal tensions of the US, and that is manifesting itself. So as much as we would like to blame individuals or groups of people for the challenges, I think the problems within America are now much more serious, and therefore we are in for a period of sustained low predictability and very high uncertainty. I must say, even in Europe, where the spending on social safety and security was very high, as Stephen Kotkin says, Europe was a superpower of social safety. When the spend on defense starts to go up, there will necessarily be a curtailment of some of the social safety mechanisms, and that can create further layers of political instability. So as much as your question is whether it is required, absolutely. Should we expect it? Absolutely not.
Hemant?
I think I agree with what Lilkan said. I will add two things. One is, you cannot expect political certainty always. Even some of the best economies in Europe have every 3 months there is a new government, right? But still we say that those systems are getting much lower shock than something like that happening in some rest of the world, right? So it's not be all and all. Ultimately, everything boils down to how much your own financial infrastructure is resilient. That happens. And that's a long-term path. Second is, political stability is often also confused with leadership, right? How much is leadership able to, or how much trust the leadership has created the country? For example, take example of India. During COVID, one of the best things which people have not noticed that our leadership did was also take advantage of the shock and increase financial inclusion and all kinds of digital infrastructure. So people know that, okay, now any kind of shock, the leadership is at play. So I think political stability, everybody likes to look at it. It gets, in the short run, it gets discounted in the pricing. But long term, it all boils down to how much resilient infrastructure are you able to create. That is how I look at it.
And I think maybe you should mention a word about the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, something that India has taken a lead in, which in your mind fuses some of the things that we're talking about.
Correct. No, I think, see, one of the biggest challenge that, and as one of the largest infrastructure financiers in the world, directly and indirectly, one of the things which we don't think about is the shock of climate and all other challenges on the physical infrastructure itself. And one of the CDRI study that Amit and team has done says that the direct shock is okay, but the indirect consequences of a climate or any other shock on infrastructure is 7 times higher than any other thing, or higher than the actual shock that the infrastructure gets. It disrupts the services, it disrupts the entire system. So how do we build in that through innovative instruments? We are also working at the bank through guarantees and various kind of instruments. I think that is also very important.
Okay, so I'm going to come to, we've only got 5 minutes. So one of the objectives of this panel is to really talk about what are the practical strategies that we should be putting in place today in stable or not so stable political environments. But as we think of it, what should we be doing today to prepare for potential flashpoints? And we're talking really about financial flashpoints. We've seen crises in the past. As Nilkant says, it's unlikely that we'll see those crises because newer problems have emerged on the horizon. So I'm going to come to him back to say, what could we be doing? So do you want to go first, Daniel?
I think as of right now, because of the global context, what is really making the difference is avoiding isolation, avoiding depending on a single market, in a single financial system. It's very important that partnerships are being created, strategic partnerships. In the Latin American case, we have learned that regional integration is really making crisis manageable, actually. We have partners we can trust. We have treaties that allow us to freely trade between us with free border, crossing of merchandises and services. And I think that kind of cooperation, that kind of regional integration is going to make us stable in the most vulnerable moment in history, probably, in regards of changes.
Yeah, good point. Lorenzo?
Well, I would say, first of all, protecting the industrial backbone of the country. It means diversification in your sources of energy and of raw material. If you depend on a single provider, on a single country, you are exposed all the time to the threat of blackmailing. And this is not acceptable. So diversification in the sources of energy, in the sources of raw material, and protecting at all costs the heavy industry. I think to steel, I think to automotive, because I think to the military industry as well, because in the world of today, if you don't have a strong defense industry, you are not safe and you're not competitive at global level. And of course, some countries like India can do that almost by themselves because they are big enough. Other countries like the European countries must act together in an EU perspective, otherwise we don't have the we are not large enough, we don't have the fundamentals to build a serious industry defense, even if we have some excellencies, but if we compare ourselves to the US, for example, or to China, we still have a longer road to go. And last thing, as Daniel said, isolation is not a solution. You have to talk, you have to discuss with everybody, you have to talk. Even this idea, there is this idea of diplomacy that I think sounds a little bit crazy in the rest of the world, but that is very common nowadays in Europe, that you only talk with the people you like. That's totally crazy. You have to talk, especially with the peoples and the countries that you don't like, because we all live in the same world. We all share this planet, and we have to coexist in some way and to find a way of coexisting. And this idea, no, we are not talking with someone who has different values, who has different ideas. It's totally crazy, because that's where dialogue is more needed. So let's try to find the things that we share instead of the things that divide us. Because if you focus on division and you divide and divide, at the end of the day, you will be totally alone. Because if you take even two individuals, you will never find two individuals who share the same idea on everything. So I think that that's valid for at personal level, at country level as well. Let's try to be constructive and to build bridges instead of building walls.
And if I can supplement that, Lorenzo, when you talk about protecting the industrial backbone and raw material sources, you're linking that to potential financial crisis, because that's the theme of our discussion today.
Yes, absolutely, because at country level, if you externalize certain key areas and some major geopolitical or some major natural events occur in the country that is providing you this kind of materials, you are not in a good situation. So this thing of not concentrating some key vital productions in some relatively small areas of the world brings safety to everybody, because in case of political or natural crisis in that area, you will be able to compensate increasing the production somewhere else. If everything is concentrated like it is to some extent in China today, some things are produced only in China. If there is a crisis there and China cannot anymore or doesn't want anymore to export to Europe or the US, it would be a problem.
Got it. Neelkant, so two quick themes if you can respond on, and then I'll come to Hemang for the last word. The flags that you see, or the red flags that you see on the horizon, and what should India be doing to prepare for those? And you've outlined quite a few in your opening remarks, but if you were to choose one or two which we should be really worried about.
So as a world, the theme being the global economic cooperation, I think that better coordination on currency, given that the global currency models have broken. So Bretton Woods broke in '71, but the model after that seems to be like totally off, and trying to control some of that volatility. And second, I think on finding ways to allow China to rebalance its economy. And frankly, the way we have gone about it so far in the last year or so has been completely chaotic and haphazard. It needs to be undone and then a new approach made, because these are, I think, the two most critical economic problems that face us right now.
Right. So, and currency itself, as you're saying, is something that can set off
Yes.
or trigger something much bigger. Okay. Hemang, last word.
I think last word, I don't know how much last word it could be, but I think as India, we need to work. We are on the right path on some of the aspects of digital and DPI, etc. But when AI comes, we need to work more on bringing those strong digital platforms. Most important in the context of our topic is that we develop our local currency capital market, local bond market. We have 5-10 years to invest a lot on that and improve that aspect of our financial structure. And then we will be more and more resilient proof, even if other kind of shocks, which are unpredictable, come up. And of course, the last word is putting a lot of interest on climate and resilient infrastructure and financing for it. We haven't touched upon blended finance and other kind of topics. We have to stop looking outside. We have to start creating Asian solution or Indian solutions for Indian challenges on those aspects as well.
I mean, if I can take a minute more from the organizers, you talked about building the bond market and strengthening it, and this is something that we talk about often in India's capital markets. But you're also saying that this is a way to become a more resilient economy to prepare against future shocks. Can you spend a minute more on that, and then we'll close?
This is what happens today. If a small municipality in somewhere Pipri Chinchwad wants to go and raise money, it's very difficult for them, right? We don't have to go to Washington DC for everything. We can raise money here. We can go to Hong Kong. We can go to Singapore. We can go to Mumbai and raise money. It boils down to that much. So the more and more we improve the ability of our structures at local and below level, we will become more resilient in a way, in every sense, not only financial structures, but infrastructure and all other kind of stuff. During pandemic, it was not about money, it was about logistics, and it was about infrastructure, and it was about production, as you said, it was about food in some places. So those resilience become very important. So I think that's what I would add.
Okay. Okay, we've run out of time. So Daniel, Lorenzo, Neelkant, and Hemang, thank you so much. And thank you to the Future Economic Cooperation Council for inviting me as well. I hand it back to the organizers.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Govindaraj, and thank you to all of our speakers. just when our thoughts were heading towards food, we managed to get the right food for thought. That's exactly that happened through this impeccable discussion here. I'd like to request all our speakers to please step forward for a quick group photograph. Meanwhile, ladies and gentlemen, this is that time of the day wherein we also move on to the much-awaited session, which is the lunch break. But please do note, after this, we will have the Honorable Union Minister of Commerce and Industry, Shri Piyush Goyalji, joining us. So I'd like to request you all to please reassemble here by 1:45 p.m. sharp.